Finovate showcases cutting-edge banking and financial technology through a global conference series featuring short-form demos and thought leadership. Now, the conversation continues on the Finovate podcast.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Finovate podcast. Joining me today, we have Suraya Randawa, the head of omnichannel experience at Informa FBX. Suraya, thanks so much for joining me.
Great to be in this, Greg. Great to meet you again.
Excellent. Yeah, so Suraya was on stage at Finovate Europe back in Berlin. We were just talking about it before we pushed record. The last Finovate event we were able to do before we were able to slide into this lockdown scenario. So we are now connecting virtually, as so many of us are. And what we'd like to talk about today is a recent report that Suraya was working on, talking about how big techs are changing the credit space and potentially eating away at some of the market share that credit cards have been living in recently. Suraya, can you start with a high-level overview of what you're seeing there?
So, Greg, I think the main topic really here is buy now, pay later. And what we've seen in the last couple of years is that proliferation of buy now, pay later players, such as Affirm, Klarna, Afterpay, ClearPay, QuadPay, you name it, right? You will have seen it at your retail checkouts. What's really interesting is seeing PayPal move beyond its PayPal credit offer. Right, is seeing Amazon offering installment payments at the point of sale or even at product pages. So that's what we're really seeing in terms of big tech moving in. The most interesting aspect for me is actually understanding the number of consumers who are engaged in this space. So in a survey by Ascent, which are part of Motley Fool, what they've noted recently this year that over a third of U.S. consumers have used a buy now, pay later service. So we're starting to see changes in consumer interaction with financial providers, with fintechs and big tech. So this is something that we should be keeping track of and understanding a little bit more.
Yeah, no, that's really fascinating. I mean, a third of Americans doing anything is always noteworthy, especially if there's something in the fintech space. And it's really interesting to see, obviously multiple ideas of where this shift in behavior could come from. But certainly the proliferation of the availability of the technology is got to be a piece of it. And so one thing which I thought was really interesting in the writing which I saw on your part was this idea that the big tech companies are actually in a better position than a lot of banks to capture this emerging, buy now, pay later ecosystem. Can you talk a little bit about why that is?
Well, I think the answer is that it's all about the context, right? So where are consumers? Consumers are consuming at the point of sale. They are searching for products. They're going out on platforms, and more so now when we're thinking about the size of digital sales during the pandemic, that they're in that context of making that sale. When I look at something as simple as, for example, a cosmetic site, on the other day, I looked at a page and I opened the product page. I clicked on the product, and I was offered two different buy now, pay later options before I even move to the checkout page. So for me, it's actually the context. Now, when I think about big tech such as PayPal, which we know has presence on many retail platforms, particularly at the point of sale, right? So we know that those partnerships have existed. When we think of the likes, for example, of Amazon, which is the power and the number of consumers who use Amazon, for example, that really gives us an idea of the power of those big techs, because that's where consumers go to interact and to actually make those payments and to buy. So it's not where we think about banks and financial providers. It's almost that the card is kind of the afterthought, right? You're not necessarily going to the banking platform to make that purchase. You're going to that retail platform, and what it is those big techs are either the big platforms themselves or they're the big partners themselves.
Sure, yeah. No, and I think one thing that's important to kind of talk about too is this link between credit cards and this buy now, pay later, and how those two are kind of multiple sides of the same coin, basically, because obviously credit cards exist in a very real buy now, pay later type of way. And so the idea that this is a service that's now available to consumers outside of that credit card ecosystem, outside of that banking ecosystem, is something which is going to be really interesting to watch. It's, credit is credit from a consumer standpoint. What do I care if I'm making a payment to, Capital One rewards card or to a consumer facing merchant that has offered me this opportunity to buy now, pay later. And it's going to be interesting to see how big of a bite that really takes out of the credit card ecosystem. So, one other question that kind of comes up here, how big of a factor is changing consumer behavior in this shift you're seeing? Because we talked about the credit being available, however it's easy for people to use. But obviously, consumers are looking to do more online transactions, like you're talking about, ordering more stuff from Amazon and other places along those lines with the pandemic going on. But at the same time, things have been kind of trending that way for a little while now. Do you think the pandemic accelerated this shift a little bit?
Absolutely. I think what digital offers is the consumer a greater visibility on potential options and potential payment options that they have. When I say that the consumer served up these options at the point of sale or even before the point of sale, what it really is for me is almost like a fragmentation of lending here. So you now have more options in terms of how you want to pay or where you want to pay. So I mentioned two options that was offered to me on a product page. Another experience where I ended up at the checkout page, I was offered 6 different payment options in terms of what I wanted to do. So there's a great degree of choice in what consumers can do. And the other aspect is also, what is that lending behavior? What is that potential change in lending behavior? As you said, it may be that you are a revolving credit card customer. You put everything on your credit card. You let that lending revolve and you pay, your minimal monthly payment. Or you may be a transactor, for example. You will pay most of your payments on time. You will pay the full payment on time. What I think that's interesting in terms of what buy now, pay later does is that it could change the dynamic a little bit. So where you may previously put most of your revolving into a credit card, you may be revolving on an individual purchase using the buy now, pay later option. Where perhaps you may have been a transactor, you may actually consider the fact that, well, actually, I am going to eventually pay something off, because a lot of those options are sort of 3 to 4 installment payments. So it gives you the feeling of being a transactor because you are paying something off. So it's thinking about how these options eventually change the dynamic of how consumers behave towards, I would say, purchase lending.
So I just want to come back. You said you saw 6 different checkout options in a recent online transaction. Is that right?
Yes.
So that's astonishing to me, because I think one of the things that we have with fintech, there's 2 big problems that I've seen over the years in the industry. One is getting people to be aware of the technologies that are out there for them, the products that are out there for them. And the other is trying to educate consumers on what all of these choices mean, what all these products can do. And so I'm trying to imagine a page where you've got 6 different checkout options, and imagine kind of the average consumer coming in there and thinking to themselves, what is going on here? Is it possible for consumers to make an educated choice with 6? I mean, that seems like overkill to me.
I think they need to give consumers a little bit more credit to a certain degree, right? And there have been surveys, for example, where some consumers would require that there are sort of buy now, pay later options to be in place in order to help their decision making. So I think this is a survey done by Harris Interactive earlier this year, where consumers actually said, that they would like to have that option, that availability of that option. So I think consumers in engaging more in digital purchase and engaging more in e-commerce are increasingly more educated in terms of the option. I think you're absolutely right towards in terms of what consumers do to manage this option and understanding the impact of their choice. Now, that for me is a space which is a slightly wider than which I think financial providers can step in.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to go ahead and just come back and say I'm philosophically not aligned with you. I believe that we can't give consumers too much credit. I think that this is one of the things that we've seen from the Finovate stage many times. There's no technology that's out there that somebody, a well-intentioned consumer can't come and mess up. And that's obviously part of the fun of it. That's part of the challenge, is trying to come up with something that's going to hit everybody, those really educated consumers and those ones who are just sort of clicking through and figuring out, I guess I'll just click here and pay later and everything's going to be just fine.
I would agree with that. Right. For me, it's more the consequences. And I think the result would be in terms of, what does regulation do in this space? Sure. And for me, that's the biggest one to watch for all of us.
Yeah. Yeah, well, so let's turn we have a couple minutes left here, so let's turn towards something else. I think a lot of our listeners are probably curious about what traditional lenders and card issuers can do to compete as this shift continues to take place. What advice do you have for those groups who are interested in kind of defending their turf a little bit as we move forward here?
So I think traditional lenders are already in the space. Some of them are. So we had Markets Pay this year partnered with JetBlue so that they could be in the space in terms of purchasing tickets. We have American Express Pay Small, where they already started doing that, enabling some of the customers with selected partners, merchants, to be able to pay using installment payments. And today we heard from My Chase plan, where customers can actually select a transaction following the purchase and actually purchase an installment. So we can see some of the lenders are already reacting. Another great example is Westpac in Australia, which is now partnering with Afterpay and to include them within their open banking platform. So we can see them reacting. Other ways is also incentivizing consumers to sort of continue using cards with better loyalty and reward programs, really, a key pillar of credit card usage. And I think the final thing, I'm kind of alluding to what we talked about last, which is, what can we do to help consumers? Right? So I do think the future will be thinking about how providers, whether it could be an aggregator, whether it's a financial provider, can offer personal financial management, right, to manage buy now, pay later. So if you think about how Wells Fargo helps customers manage their recurring transactions and subscriptions, why not help customers manage their risk, their cash flow, and their risk with the various buy now, pay later purchases that they would have made. If I had a sort of a magic ball, I'd probably look at it, what's the future? Could there be an AI plugin, where you're sitting at a product selection stage and you're really then thinking about, and someone offers you the best buy now, pay later purchase option when you're using, when you're at the checkout page. So I think there are a lot of different options that consumers could be helped with. For me, this is kind of a new unmet need that has been created with the proliferation of buy now, pay later. So I think there are a lot of things that financial providers can do.
Yeah, I think certainly there's opportunity for creativity. And when you have a shift in consumer behavior, when consumers are basically telling the industry, this is a service that we want, this is a product that we want, and they clearly are. That's what the data is suggesting. And I think, to your earlier point, this is only going to be something that continues to get more popular. So it'll be really interesting to see where those opportunities are for traditional financial services providers to get involved, where there's opportunities for new fintech to get involved. I love that idea for the AI play, that kind of aggregator. And I also think there's always an opportunity for someone to come in and act as a trusted resource, somebody who can provide unbiased advice to help keep their customers safe and happy, and make sure they understand the implications of when they click that button and what it actually means. So, a couple of different ways for companies to get a piece of this, and it's going to be just fascinating to watch how this trend continues to evolve. So, well, Suraya, thank you so much for taking some time to chat with me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was an absolute pleasure, Greg.
Till we can meet next time in person. Hopefully that's coming up soon.
The Finovate podcast is produced by Informa Connect in association with Provoke.fm Media. Check out Finovate.com for information on Finovate's upcoming shows and to learn how you can get involved. The discount code Finovate Podcast will save you 20% on tickets to all of our events. And you can email us at info@finovate.com for information on sponsoring, speaking, or demoing. Thanks for listening.